Well, let's face it, the struggle is real every time we encounter questions with analogy. With those missing terms, coupled words with options almost all are correct. Tendency is that we get confused. In the worst, we just give up on the test items. But what if I tell you that analogy is one of the easiest topics in English? In this video, we're not only going to focus on the meaning of analogy, I am also going to give you an in-depth discussion of its 5 basic types, so that the next time you would be given an analogy exam, it would be easier for you to answer them. Hello everyone, this is Teacher Tom, and it's time to learn English the better way. So, our basic question here is, what is analogy? According to lexico.com, analogy is a comparison between two things, typically for the purpose of explanation or clarification. Now, let's highlight the word comparison. In analogy, we always compare two things. We always compare two pairs of words. For what purpose? For explanation or clarification. Now, for you to better picture out the meaning of analogy, let's have an example. We have here a photo of a knife and a photo of a ruler. If you can remember in your English books or test papers, analogy is always written this way. We've got two columns here which represent the phrase is to, and another pair of columns in the middle for the word as. So, if we're going to read this one, we say knife is to cut as ruler is to measure. Again, by definition, analogy has always two pairs of words. We've got here our first pair, knife and cut, and our second pair, ruler and measure. The name of the game in the analogy is this. We always have to discover the relationship that connects them. And when I say relationship, we're talking about the type of analogy, okay? So, let's focus our attention first on the first pair of words. Knife is to cut. In this case, can you help me determine the relationship that connects the words knife and cut? If you're going to tell me, sir, we use knife to cut our food, then you are correct. The word cut tells us the function of the word knife. Now let's go to our second pair. Ruler is to measure. Same thing. The word measure tells us the purpose or the function of a ruler. We use a ruler to measure an object. That is analogy. We have to discover the relationship that connects the words. In this case, we have what we call analogy of function. Now let's go to the different types of analogy. The point here is you should know at least some of the most basic types of analogy, because once you discover what type of analogy is being asked about in your test paper, then it is easier for you to locate which among the options is correct, okay? Now let's go to our first pair of analogy by answering this one. Chubby is to fat as slender is to blank. Again, in answering an analogy exam, always focus your attention first on the first pair of words. In this case, we've got chubby is to fat. So, what is the relationship that connects these two words? If you're going to tell me, sir, they are the same in meaning because if someone is fat, then we can call him or her chubby, then you are correct. This is an example of synonym analogy. So, we are going to look for that word that is synonymous to the word slender. Is it letter A, old, letter B, young, letter C, thin, or letter D, healthy? The correct answer is letter C. If someone is slender, then he or she is definitely thin. So, when we say synonym analogy, these are pairs that show a similar relationship or have the same meaning. In other words, when we say same meaning, these words are synonymous. For example, clean is to neat, as fragrant is to scented. Now, I'm gonna give you 5 seconds to try to answer this one. Round is to circle. A. Fast is to slow. B. Stem is to tree. C. Pangasinan is to Philippines. Or D. Intelligent is to brilliant. If your answer is letter D, then you are correct. Because letter A, fast is to slow, is actually an antonym analogy. Letter B, stem is to tree, part to whole analogy. Letter C, Pangasinan to Philippines, this is an analogy of geography. Therefore, the correct answer is letter D. Now let's go to the next type of analogy. Free is to cage, as wealth is to blank. Now let's focus again on our first pair. This time we've got free and cage. If you are caged, you are locked in one place. Therefore, you don't have the freedom. You are not free. So, this pair of words is an example of antonym analogy. Why? Because they are opposite in meaning. Therefore, let's look for that word that is antonymous to the word wealth. Is it letter A, rich, letter B, poverty, letter C, abundant, or letter D, enough? The correct answer is letter B. Very good. Poverty, because letter A, letter C, and letter D, the words rich, abundant, and enough are actually synonymous to the word wealth. Therefore, the correct answer is letter B, poverty. Again, in antonym analogy, we've got pairs that show an opposite relationship or meaning. If in synonym we have the word synonymous, here in antonym we have the term antonymous. If the words are antonymous, it means that these words have different meaning, okay? For example, fast is to slow, as veteran is to amateur. Now let's try to answer this one. Huge is to minute. Yes, you heard it right. We pronounce this word as minute if we are pertaining about the size of an object. But if you are referring about the time, then we sound this one as minute. Okay? So what is minute then? Remember, we're talking about antonym. Something that is huge is big. What is the antonym of the word big? Small. So something that is minute is very small. Very, very small. Okay? Now, let's look for the pair that also shows antonym analogy. Is it letter A, speedy is to slow? Letter B, old is to antique? Letter C, summer is to hot? Or letter D, fatigue is to yawn? The correct answer is letter A. Speedy is too slow. Why? Because something that is speedy is very fast, and fast is the opposite of the word slow. Letter B is an example of analogy of synonym, because something that is antique is already old. For letter C, it is an analogy of characteristics. Why? The word hot characterizes the word or the season summer. While for fatigue is to yawn, this is an example of analogy of cause and effect. Okay? Now let's go to our third type of analogy. Let's try to answer this one. Battery is to flashlight, as printer is to blank. Again, what's our first basic rule? Focus our attention on the first pair of words, battery and flashlight. Second basic rule, let's discover the relationship that connects them. We all know a flashlight won't work without a battery. Therefore, your battery is an important part of your flashlight. In this case, we're actually talking about part to whole analogy. Therefore, which among the options below should tell us that printer is just a part of it? Is it letter A, newspaper? Letter B, coupon or coupon? Letter C, ink? Or letter D, computer set? If your answer is letter C, then you are wrong, because the correct answer is letter D, computer set. But sir, why not letter C? Ink is an important part of a printer. Without an ink, your printer won't work. Yes, that is correct. But the thing here is, we're talking about part to whole analogy. Ink is a part of a printer, while printer is a part of a computer set. Therefore, the correct answer again is letter D, computer set. So, what do we mean when we say part to whole analogy? These are pairs that show the first word as the part of the second word. For example, branch is to tree as roof is to house, okay? Now let's try to answer this one. Aglet is to shoelace. Sir, what is an aglet? Do you still remember the plastic or the metal sheet over the end of your shoelace? That is what we call aglet, okay? So, which among the options below is also an example of part to whole analogy? Is it letter A, paper is to pencil? Letter B, winter is to cold? Letter C, box is to storage? Or letter D, wheel is to car? Well, you got it right. Letter D, wheel is to car. Now let's go to the fourth type of analogy by answering this one. Studying is to passing as planting is to blank. Let's proceed right away to our first pair of words. If you are studying well for a particular subject, then there's a big chance that you will pass that subject. Therefore, passing is actually the result or the effect of studying. Therefore, we are actually talking about cause and effect analogy. So, among the given options, which one would tell us the good effects of planting? Is it letter A, observing, letter B, plowing, letter C, watering, or letter D, harvesting? The correct answer is letter D. If you plant something, you will harvest something. It's just like if you sow something, you will reap something. So, when we say cause and effect relationship, these are pairs of words wherein the first one is the cause and the second shows the effect. For example, fatigue is to yawn as itchy is to scratch. We tend to yawn every time we experience physical or mental tiredness. So, the fatigue that we experience is actually the cause of our yawning. Same thing in our next pair of words. We scratch our body, it is because that part of our body is itchy. Okay, now let's try to answer this one. Tease is to quarrel. Every time you tease your sibling or your classmate, expect that you would quarrel, okay? So as much as possible, avoid teasing someone else. Now, which among the given options below is also an example of cause and effect analogy? Is it letter A, save is to allocate? Letter B, write is to note? Letter C, unbox is to reveal? Or letter D, work is to earn? If your answer is letter D, then you are correct. A, B, and C are all examples of analogy of synonym, okay? Now let's go to the final type of analogy for this video. Priest is to church as judge is to blank. Again, let's focus our attention on the first pair of words, priest and church. Then, let's discover the relationship. We all know a priest performs his duty inside the church. So this one actually is what we call person to situation analogy. So, which among the given options below would tell us the place where a judge performs his or her duty? Is it letter A, school, letter B, studio, letter C, courtroom, or letter D, market? The correct answer is actually letter C, courtroom. So, what is a person to situation analogy? It has pair of words wherein the first one names the person as the second explains the situation or the performance of that person. For example, teacher is to school as doctor is to infirmary. Sir, what is infirmary? Where can you find a doctor? In the hospital. The other term for hospital is actually infirmary, okay? Now it's time to answer our final deck of analogy question. Police is the law enforcement. If I'm going to ask you, what is the main job of a police officer? It's actually to enforce a law. Now, which among the given options below would give us a perfect combination of a person in its actual main job in his or her chosen profession? Is it letter A, journalist is to news writing? Letter B, geologist is to weather forecasting? Letter C, director is to movie production? Or letter D, investor is to technology innovation? The correct answer is of course letter A, journalist is to news writing. Because the main job of a journalist is actually to write a news. For letter B, geologists do not actually study weather. They study the earth and its history using rocks. While for letter C, directors do not actually produce movies. They are responsible for the storyline of the movies we watch. And for letter D, investors, they do not actually innovate technology. What they do, they invest their money and they just make it grow, okay? So the correct answer is actually letter A. Journalist is to news writing. Those are the 5 basic types of analogy. Remember, we still have a lot of analogy types around, and we're going to cover some more of them in a separate video. In this case, we just covered 5 because I don't want you to experience information overload. But I hope you learned a lot in this clip, and if you did, please do not hesitate to click the subscribe button below. Once again, this is Teacher Dong, helping you to learn English the better way.